Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that isn't in your history textbooks. Or if it is, skip the spicy parts. Picture this, the battlefield quiet for once, not from peace, mind you, but because even the fiercest soldiers occasionally need to breathe between the screams and the chaos. The sun is dipping below the horizon, painting everything in shades of copper and blood orange. Korsh, Alurnkong shades of copper and blood drur, and the air smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and whatever herbs the army's cooks have been burning in their endless attempts to mask last week's rations. Enter Valeria, yes, the kind of woman who seems like she shouldn't exist in a world dominated by swords and stubborn egos. She moves with a confidence that could make seasoned generals pause mid-bellow, a slight sway in her step that hints she knows more than she lets on. And of course she does. Behind those battlefield walls, she's far from the helpless figure the soldiers whisper about around the campfires. She's dangerous in that way that doesn't require a sword, yet somehow every man notices anyway. Now, the man she's playing her dangerous game with isn't some boy pretending to be a warrior. He's Commander Lucan, scarred across one cheek from a duel gone sideways, eyes like obsidian reflecting firelight, a man whose reputation for brutality is matched only by the whispered rumors of what he does in the dark. Normally, he'd be immune to distractions. He's faced down mutinies or raiders and even a plague of locusts without flinching. But Valeria, well, she's different. The walls of the tent are thick, the kind that trap both heat and secrets. Lucan has returned from the scouting missions, still carrying the smell of smoke and iron on his boots. Expects silence. He does not expect the soft brush of fingers along furs, the deliberate tilt of a head, the smoldering glance that says, "I see everything and I choose to play." Valeria leans close, letting a fingertip trace along the edge of a map pinned to the table, a map that has already cost lives and could cost more. Yet here she is, drawing his attention away from strategy and towards something far more immediate. Outside, the soldiers pace, laugh, and curse the wind, oblivious to the silent battle occurring within the tent walls. Valeria lets Lucan notice, lets him lean closer, lets him believe he might gain an upper hand with a subtle gesture or whispered word. But of course, she's always 3 moves ahead, weaving a dance of power and temptation that leaves him off balance yet wanting more. And when he finally realizes he's been lured, it's too late. The game has already begun, the stakes higher than any skirmish he's faced today. By the time night fully claims the battlefield, Valeria has asserted herself not with a blade, not with a command, but with the kind of control that makes men rethink entire campaigns. And as the candlelight flickers across her face, casting shadows that exaggerate the faintest curve of her lips, she knows exactly how far she can push Lucan before he realizes. He's been captivated entirely by the woman behind the battlefield walls, rather than the victories he thinks he's won. So we pick up where we left off. The tent's quiet, but not really. Not if you count the subtle electricity in the air, the unspoken rules, and the tension so thick you could carve it with a dagger. Valeria sits across from Lucan now, the map between them forgotten, her posture deliberately casual, one leg crossed, an elbow resting on the table, chin propped in her hand. She's giving him a choice without saying a word, play the general or surrender to curiosity. And yes, he notices. Oh, he notices. Lucan scratches the stubble along his jaw, that scar catching the dim firelight just so, and leans forward, pretending to steady troop positions while really tracking the way her eyes flicker toward him. Sborden. She tilts her head, lips parting slightly. Not enough to speak, just enough to make him wonder what she might say, what she might do. And this, my friends, is why history is messy, because sometimes the battles aren't fought with swords, but with glances, subtle provocations, and power plays disguised as casual movements. Outside, the camp hasn't changed much. Soldiers smoke their pipes, whisper about rumors, or recount minor skirmishes, but none of that matters in here. Inside, Valeria's control grows with every measured pause, every deliberate sip of wine. She lets Lucan inch closer, just enough that he feels bold, that he feels in charge. Fürchend verwehren. But she knows the truth. She's orchestrating it all, a puppeteer whose strings are invisible yet utterly binding. Your men aren't as loyal as you think, she murmurs finally, voice soft, like she's confessing a secret. Lucan freezes mid-breath, unsure if he should scowl or lean closer, but the firelight catches the intensity in her eyes, and he knows. He must listen. He wants to, more than he should, more than anyone should want in a tent at the edge of a battlefield. But there it is, fascination, obsession, the kind that turns even hardened commanders into fools. Valeria leans forward, enough that her shoulder brushes his, and the contact is electric. She doesn't flinch, doesn't step back. Instead, she lets the touch linger in his mind, a small, intimate challenge. He's been trained to control, to dominate, to win at every cost. But she's teaching him something entirely new. Patience, restraint, and the cruel thrill of almost having what he wants, but not quite. By the time the candle gutters low, Lucan's mind is spinning. Orders, strategies, enemy movements, all background noise. The real war is here, in the dance of shadows and whispered provocations, where Valeria is winning without raising a blade. And she knows it. Tomorrow she thinks, tomorrow I push harder. But tonight is about planting seeds, letting him chase the idea of control while she quietly confirms the truth. In this war camp, behind these battlefield walls, power belongs to the one who knows how to tempt, manipulate, and never ever surrender too easily. Morning arrives sluggishly over the camp, pale sunlight spilling through the tent flaps, illuminating the dust motes like tiny floating embers. Valeria is already awake, lying on furs with a rolled-up cloak under her head, pretending to rest, but really watching the camp through the thin fabric walls. She knows Lucan is outside somewhere, barking orders, inspecting guards, but she doesn't move. She lets him exhaust himself in his routines. After all, part of the game is letting him feel in control while he's quietly ensnared. Breakfast is a quiet affair, at least in appearance. Servants shuffle in with bread, dried meat, and small cups of watered wine. Valeria sits primly, like the obedient presence expected of a captured noble, but she's anything but. Every flick of her hand, every tilt of her head is calculated. A brush of fingers across the cup, a subtle glance toward a young lieutenant who dares to stare too long. All signals, tactics. Lucan notices more than he admits, catching the nuances in her posture, the faint smirk. When he's not looking. Later, when the camp grows noisy, with soldiers reporting minor skirmishes, she steps outside briefly, feigning curiosity. She passes near the blacksmiths, the archers, and even the mess tent. Eyes follow her naturally, whispers forming like a storm. The general's captive. She's dangerous. Look at her walk. And she knows this. She feeds the fire, letting the rumors fan the invisible flames of power. She's cultivating. Kung. By midday, Lucan has summoned her to review troop movements. She enters his tent, carrying the maps with deliberate slowness. He's seated, armored gauntlets off, scarred forearms resting on the table, jaw tense. She spreads the maps before him, but her real work is in the pauses, lingering just long enough over his hand as she points to terrain, letting her hair brush his shoulder as she leans in, subtle enough to make him aware, thrilling and frustrated all at once. What about this flank? He asks, voice gruff, but there's a hesitance now, a crack in the armor of his authority. He knows she's more than a pawn, more than a passive captive. He wants to dominate, to command, but every step she takes is a reminder that this war is as much hers as his, and that the battlefield extends into the intimate, strategic dance between them. Ka Sheng Shan's. She smiles faintly, almost imperceptibly, and traces a finger along a river's course on the map. If you leave it undefended, someone will take advantage, she murmurs. tone casual, but eyes locking on his, daring him to challenge her. And he doesn't. He can't. Because in this moment, the power struggle isn't on the field. It's here, in the shadows, in touches and glances, in whispered warnings, and the slow burn of attention that neither wants to fully surrender. Evening falls, the camp quieting except for the crackle of fires. Valeria slips out once more, moving between tents, checking on the guards who, perhaps unknowingly, are already under her influence. Soldiers murmur at her passage, some in admiration, some in envy, all feeding the aura of control she exudes. Lucan watches from a distance, tension coiling in his chest, both drawn and wary, recognizing the dangerous thrill that is her presence. As night drapes over the camp, the stage is set for the next act. Secrets, whispered provocations, and the unspoken game of power will escalate. And Valeria? She lies on her furs, eyes bright in the candlelight, already planning the moves that will make her indispensable. Not just as a prize, but as the silent architect of control behind the battlefield walls. The moon rises pale and thin over the camp, casting silver shadows that stretch long across the tents and churned earth. Valeria moves like a ghost, silent and deliberate, slipping between patrols and fires. She knows who watches her, who envies, and who underestimates her, and she lets each step play a subtle symphony of tension. The soldiers whisper as she passes, half in awe, half in warning, her presence alone bending the energy of the camp. Lucan is nowhere to be seen yet, preoccupied with reports and night inspections, leaving the tent door slightly ajar. Valeria pauses there, glancing inside as if by chance, and her eyes catch a flicker of candlelight reflecting off a folded map. She steps in softly, the faint rustle of her furs echoing in the quiet. Every motion is precise, every tilt of her head is calculated. She knows the thrill of being watched, the dangerous electricity that comes with it. From behind the tent flap, a shadow moves, one of the younger lieutenants, curious, reckless, maybe a little foolish. He pauses when he sees her, unsure whether to speak, and she smiles, a small, knowing curl of lips that promises nothing and everything at once. "Be careful where you linger," she says softly, her voice a warm caress and a sharp blade, all at once. Some lessons are learned too late. His eyes widen, a flush creeping up his neck, and she slips past him, letting the subtle power of her presence linger in the space she leaves behind. An hour later, Lucan returns, the scent of dust and smoke clinging to his armor. He notices the shift immediately, a subtle order rearranged in the tent, the map edges slightly lifted, the air carrying the faint warmth of her, She sits quietly on the furs, hair loose, eyes sharp, pretending calm as if nothing had occurred, conjuring calm as if nothing had occurred. Yet the tension in the room coils like a living thing. He kneels to examine the maps, but his attention keeps drifting, caught on the gentle curve of her neck, the deliberate tilt of her chin. "Cord worrying, what were you doing out there?" he asks, tone low, more curiosity than accusation, but with the undertone of his own desire, attempting control. She doesn't answer immediately, letting him wait, letting the silence thrum with unspoken implications. When she does speak, it's casual, almost teasing, observing, learning, protecting what's ours. The words are simple, but the double meaning is unmistakable. Lucan's jaw tightens. He wants to assert dominance, but he cannot deny the magnetic pull she exerts. Night deepens and the camp settles into uneasy sleep, the fires crackling low. Valeria slips out once more, moving with the grace of someone untouchable, her mind racing with strategy and desire interlaced. Every glance from the guards, every hushed comment from soldiers, every subtle bow or hesitation is catalogued. She is crafting not just control over the camp, but over him, the warlord who believes he commands everything, yet finds himself ensnared in a web he cannot fully see. By the moon's zenith, the stage is set for a confrontation not of swords, but of wills. Lucan will feel her influence, whether he admits it or not, and the camp will bend subtly around her presence. Valeria smiles faintly as she finally settles, curling into the furs, eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. The game is far from over, and every shadow, every whisper, every forbidden touch yet to come is a move she already owns. Loud, yeah. Dawn is stubbornly creeping over the horizon, painting the camp in muted gold and ash. Valeria rises, letting the furs slide from her shoulders, her hair tangled just enough to catch the morning light. A deliberate imperfection meant to captivate without trying too hard. She steps outside the tent, bare feet soft against the frost-hardened earth, and immediately senses the shift. Soldiers glance her way, some with curiosity, others with the vague unease of realizing that power can take a form far subtler than steel. Lucan emerges not long after, armor scratched, boots muddy from early inspections. He watches her quietly, the way one might watch a dangerous predator, knowing it could strike, yet unwilling to look away. Valeria meets his gaze, sharp and teasing, and allows just a flicker of vulnerability in her smile. Spark meant to lure, not trap. "Morning," she says lightly, though her tone carries a tension that only he seems capable of reading. He notices immediately the heat rising behind his calm exterior. The negotiation begins with no words of war, no open challenge. Instead, it's in shared space, in proximity, in the subtle choreography of two wills intertwined. Valeria fetches the morning wine, offering it with a tilt of her head, and Lucan takes it, hesitant, yet intrigued. Each sip is a silent acknowledgement. She moves with intention, always 3 steps ahead, and he feels the pull of a game he cannot fully control. Behind them, the camp stirs. Guards shift nervously, some noticing the tension, some merely murmuring amongst themselves, "Termast," but all aware of the subtle power Valeria wields. She allows a casual glance toward a particularly bold lieutenant, letting the silent message travel. The warlord may command, but influence is not so easily won. Lucan notices it too, and for the first time, his authority feels complicated, interlaced with the undeniable sway of her presence. By midday, the firelit tent becomes a battlefield of desire and intellect. Valeria proposes adjustments to supply lines, small enough to appear innocuous, yet strategic enough to draw Lucan's attention. His responses are measured, but he cannot ignore the thrill in the dance of her mind. Each suggestion is layered, each word chosen to tease, to challenge, to remind him that she is not simply a captive, not simply a prize, but a player who understands the stakes of the camp and of him. Evening falls with the sky burning in amber and crimson. Valeria allows herself a moment near the campfire, furs wrapped loosely around her, and watches Lucan from the shadows of his own tent flap. He steps out, his eyes searching, and she meets him halfway, deliberately brushing her hand along the surface of the wooden post. As if by accident, the touch electric in its subtlety. A spark passes, barely seen, yet it changes the air. Lucan steps closer, curiosity and desire entwined, but Valeria pulls back just slightly, letting the space between them thrum with anticipation. The night stretches on with whispered strategies, quiet laughter, and the tension of two minds colliding with the weight of authority and seduction. Soldiers murmur, shadows flicker, and the camp itself becomes an arena of unspoken battles. Valeria smiles softly as she curls once more into her furs, knowing every glance, every movement, every whispered word has built a foundation stronger than any chain, more powerful than any sword. The game continues, and she has already secured the upper hand. Night has settled over the camp like a velvet shroud, the torches flickering against the tents and casting long, wavering shadows across frost-dusted earth. Valeria moves silently, a deliberate shadow herself, passing through the rows of tents as if she belongs to the darkness. rather than the firelight. Every step is measured, every glance intentional. She knows she is being watched. Lucan's eyes, sharp and calculating, have followed her movements since she stepped outside hours ago. He approaches quietly, boots muffled by the cold, each step a reminder that he is both protector and predator. 4. A warlord who commands not just soldiers, but the tension that hums around her. Valeria turns to meet him, her expression calm yet charged with an unspoken challenge, and he pauses, almost unwilling to break the silence. It's a game, this dance, and neither can afford to stumble, not when the entire camp is a potential audience. The air between them thickens as she speaks softly, almost too softly to hear. Some things in this camp, they aren't as they seem. Her words are casual, but they land like stones in still water, rippling through his thoughts. Lucan tilts his head, intrigued, and Valeria allows her gaze to linger, warm yet unyielding. A flicker of a smile, teasing, daring, as if to say, I know what you think you control, but I see further. Around them, the camp sleeps uneasily. Guards shift in their tents, whispers trailing from the shadows, suspicion mingling with curiosity. Valeria knows exactly which glances to catch, which murmurs to provoke, just enough to stir unease without drawing outright conflict. She leans closer to Lucan, the brush of her fingers against his sleeve intentional. A spark felt more than seen. He resists just barely, tension coiling like a spring, but his restraint is part of the thrill. She speaks again, low and deliberate. Power is fragile and desire, even more so. Each word hangs in the cold night air, warming it imperceptibly. Lucan exhales, caught between command and surrender, the flickering torchlight reflecting in his eyes like molten gold. The touch of her hand, the softness in her tone, and the precision of her movements all combine to tip the balance of authority in her favor without a single sword drawn. Minutes stretch, elongated by unspoken anticipation. Valeria steps back, giving him space, yet leaving him wanting more, the dance of control and seduction perfectly orchestrated. He studies her as she moves away, wrapped in her furs, the quiet power of her presence lingering like smoke. Outside the tent, the wind stirs, carrying whispers of distant fires and restless soldiers. Yet inside, a different kind of heat hums, one neither sword nor command could extinguish. By the time dawn begins to stain the horizon, war horizon, the silent war has already been won. Layer by layer, glance by glance. Valeria curls once more in her furs, satisfied, knowing that the subtle moves she has played tonight have shifted the camp's balance. That Lucan now carries both desire and caution in equal measure. And somewhere in the shadows, ambition, lust, and strategy mingle, ready to ignite into the next chapter of this delicate, dangerous game. Dawn creeps slowly over the camp, spilling pale light across frost-kissed tents and muddy paths. Yet inside the largest tent, the air remains thick, heavy with last night's unspoken exchanges. Valeria stirs beneath her furs, eyes fluttering open, already calculating, already anticipating. She knows Lucan is awake before her. He always is. His shadow moving across the canvas wall like a predator surveying territory. She doesn't flinch. She never does. Morning comes fast when you haven't slept, she murmurs, voice low, teasing, deliberately casual. He doesn't respond immediately, simply watches her, leaning against a support beam. The tension in his posture a silent admission of his own anticipation. She rises slowly, every movement deliberate, brushing a strand of hair from her face, allowing the smallest hint of exposure without yielding control. It is a language they both understand, power expressed in the subtlest of gestures. But breakfast arrives, the usual clatter of trays and the scent of roasted meat and herbs filling the tent. But Valeria remains a study in calm composure. Lucan sits opposite her, still observing, his own meal untouched at first. She pours wine into a bronze cup, hands steady, eyes meeting his with that precise balance of invitation and command. Drink, she says, and it is not a request. He accepts barely, yet the heat in his eyes betrays him. Around the camp, whispers ripple. Soldiers glance toward the tent, some with curiosity, some with envy. They see her as untouchable, yet undeniably desired, the silent spark that disrupts the rigid order of the encampment. Valeria thrives on this attention, knowing every glance she catches, every murmured rumor she stirs, strengthens her invisible dominion. Lucan notices, too, the subtle manipulations, and he cannot suppress the simultaneous frustration and admiration it evokes. The conversation turns toward the day's orders. Lucan speaks, measured, commanding, yet he cannot ignore her insights. Valeria suggests subtle adjustments, redistributing patrols, noting which scouts might be compromised, which tents seem vulnerable. Her intelligence is sharp, precise, and he listens, because ignoring her counsel would be foolish. The power dynamic between them is complex. He leads armies, she leads minds, desires, and suspicions alike. As the morning stretches, the tension tightens again, coiled like the spring of a bow. Valeria allows a momentary touch, a finger grazing his hand as she passes, just enough to remind him that she is present, aware, untouchable, yet undeniably within reach. Lucan's jaw tightens. He knows she is playing a game he has not yet learned to fully master, yet he cannot help but be drawn deeper into her orbit, craving both the control he cannot claim and the obedience she only feigns. The camp hums with activity outside, soldiers moving, orders being shouted, the mundane rhythm of a war-bound life continuing. Yet within the tent, a different kind of battle unfolds, subtle, intimate, dangerous. Valeria smiles faintly, knowing that every calculated gesture, every carefully placed word, strengthens her hold on the most powerful man in the camp. And in the shadows of authority and desire, she remains untouchable, undefeated, the flame around which all others orbit. Inko.